Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Running Explained podcast. I am your host, Coach Elizabeth. Very excited to have you here with me today as we are finally tackling one of my favorite topics, training load and training load management. Might not seem that exciting or sexy or important, but I think training load and training load management, I think it's interesting. I know it's important. Understanding your training load and how to manage it is one of the most important things you can do as a runner to keep yourself injury-free and progressing in the way you want to be progressing. So we are going to talk all about that. Before we get started, though, I am very excited to remind everyone with the approach of the Philadelphia Marathon finally selling out very early, does not usually sell out in July. But if you are running the Philadelphia Marathon or the Philadelphia Half Marathon and you are looking for a really exciting, awesome, tight-knit team training environment where you're going to have training specifically for your goals, you're going to have all your questions answered, you're going to make new friends, you're going to have a sports dietitian tell you exactly what you should and should not be doing for the training cycle, then you are looking for the Road to Race Day Philadelphia program. So this is a small team group training program. It is 4 months. We start August 4th, and we train for 4 months for the Philadelphia Marathon or Half Marathon all together in a virtual environment. And then we have really fun in-person race day events. And so with 5 Running Explained coaches, myself included, as well as Coach Nick, Coach Natalie, Coach Mick, and Coach Andrew, we're capping this group at 25 runners total. Spots are filling up. It's going to be so much fun, and it's really going to be for runners who are looking to truly maximize that race day experience and feel super confident, and also for runners who really thrive on being in that team environment. This is for you. So register now. The website is the website is it's runningexplained.com/road to race day. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send us a quick email, DM us on Instagram. We'd love to help you train for your absolutely best Philadelphia. Back to our main topic this week, training load and training load management. So like I said, I've wanted to tackle this topic for a while. I thought about having various guests on the show, and then it never just kind of came together. And then my partnership with Coros started a couple months ago, and one of the ideas I knew would be really great to talk about in conjunction with Coros would be training load and training load management. And whether or not you are a Coros user, I would love you to become one. Whether or not you are one, you will still obviously be able to use 99% of the stuff in this podcast. But if you are a Coros user, we're also going to talk about some of the features that your Coros will specifically be able to help you with when it comes to training load and training load management. And of course, if you are looking for a new watch, Coros has fabulous ones. Full stop. Super affordable with all the features that you need. And you can get a free second watch band. Who doesn't love free stuff? With code RUNEXP on Coros.com. So Coros, that's how you spell Coros, Coros. And if you are purchasing a watch, you can put a second watch band in your cart and then apply the code RUNEXP, RUNEXP, and get that second watch band for free. And then you can start training like an absolute boss. I mean, you already are, but you can train like an even bossier boss. Training load. Bear with me when I say that this is the least sexy but most important topic that underpins how we improve as athletes, period, no matter what sport we're talking about. Well, okay, let me put it this way. When it comes to endurance-based sports, but, training load is a really important concept, but especially for endurance sports. So what is training load? So training load is the overall stress that you experience from your training that is typically expressed in a combination of how hard and how much you are working. So why this matters is because when our training load becomes imbalanced or is poorly managed, we are far more likely to end up injured, burned out, plateaued, just miserable, not progressing the way we want to. Maybe we're one of those runners who you're all in, burnout, stuck in that cycle. I'm pretty sure that training load management has something to do with why that keeps happening. At the core of it, training load is simply how much you can handle at any given time. And yes, we're talking about acute training load and chronic training load. It can be a measure of your overall fitness capacity, but it's really helpful to put a number or some sort of information or metric behind, well, how much am I actually doing? It's easy to look at mileage or kilometers or like hours of running per week, or what else a way we can think about the load that we're doing. I mean, that's a big one, right? So we can talk about mileage. Typically think about, oh, my training load, mileage. But that is all, that doesn't necessarily quantify how hard you are working or how hard your body is being stressed. It is something that you're doing, but it doesn't always tell the full picture. Like, oh, just this many miles, or oh, this much time on feet, or training load. It takes a peek under the hood and tells you actually how hard you're working. So this week, we're going to talk about acute versus chronic training load. We're going to talk about ways that you can measure and track and analyze your training load using concepts like TRIMP, training impulse, and training stress score, TSS. Briefly talk about that. That's pretty much TRIMP, just with slightly different information. And we're going to talk about how to track your recovery in the context of your training load using heart rate variability, and just talk about a whole bunch of other exciting and random things that are helpful for this topic. So, what is training load and why bother tracking this? I'm going to say right now, you can listen to this whole episode. And if none of this interests you, if you find it interesting, but you have zero desire to actually do anything with this information in terms of tracking, that's fine. That's fine. That's totally fine. This is going to be a really great tool for some runners, and it's going to be not at all helpful for others. Not every tool is built for every person, and that's fine. But if we are going to use it, this is how we do it. So training load is a measure, an understanding, a metric, a way of graphing or tracking the cumulative stress that you are experiencing from your exercise, from your workouts, from your training, thinking about that intensity and duration and frequency. So it's essentially how much strain you're experiencing from your training. So the reason that we might want to look at our training load or appropriately manage our training load is that large spikes in training load are linked to higher injury risk and also burnout and just being absolutely miserable. By understanding how to manage your training load appropriately and not be stuck in that big spike, then burnout, or I keep getting injured, you were able to optimize your training so that you can train consistently really well over time instead of being a hero or having those hero weeks. You did everything in 1 week and then you were so burned out for the following 2 weeks you did nothing. We want to avoid that. So it helps you understand how to train. And then, of course, it can also help you understand how your body is adapting to your training. So with training load, we can track like it is stress, the stress that you're experiencing. And we can also, in conjunction with things like recovery and your actual training metrics, how much you're running, how fast you're running, these are all things you can look at together. So thinking about the training stress that we experience, like I said, there are ways that we tend to quantify how much training we're doing. And we typically, for most runners, think about that in mileage. Oh, how many miles do you run? Oh, I ran this many miles this week, or I ran, or kilometers, insert, distance here. Oh, I ran this many miles or kilometers, or oh my gosh, my base is so much higher than it used to be, or wow, I can't believe I peaked at that mileage. It's more miles than I've ever run before. And that tells you something. It does tell you a lot about what you did, but it's not the full story. So that is all mileage, kilometers, even duration, pace. Those are all like output metrics. Those are not necessarily measures on their own of how hard you worked, but they are expressions of what you were able to do, if that makes sense. But it doesn't necessarily track stress. If I go run 10 miles at, I was going to say, at 7-minute pace, which I've literally never done before in my life, and I certainly couldn't do it today, but let's say that I tried. let's say that I tried today to go run 10 miles and maintain 7 minute per mile pace. I would not make it to the end of that 10-mile run. And I would be working very, very hard the whole time until I essentially just like collapsed. But there are a ton of people walk out the door right now, 10 minutes, 7 minute per mile pace. That's basically a recovery run for them. So it helps us understand not just, well, how many miles are you running? What paces can you run? But how hard are you working and managing that load over time? So, like I said, mileage, pay, those things are kind of output metrics. When we talk about measuring the training stress that we experience, there are two ways to look at it. We can look at internal measurements of load. So the internal physiological stress that we're experiencing, looking at things like your heart rate, looking at, well, that's actually pretty much a big one. Heart rate, you could look if you were tracking lactate, if you were on a doing a VO2 max test or doing some sort of gas exchange, you could look at measurements of how much CO2 you're breathing out. So there are those actual internal variables that we can look at that will help you understand how hard you're working from an internal standpoint. And then you also have some external variables. Miles is one of them. Pace is another one. Power, but those are all entirely subjective and relative to you. And you also, in this context, when we talk about training load and training load management, this specific concept, we're not just talking about output stuff. We are always considering some sort of internal physiological variable. Whether that is RPE, I'm going to tell you about my experiences with tracking training load management in like my super quick and dirty way in an Excel spreadsheet. So you need some sort of internal, well, how hard were you working? Even if it's just, well, how hard did this feel? You can have runs in, and as we are entering into the very, very hottest days of summer soon, as this podcast is being recorded in July, you may have noticed that some runs at some paces in the middle of the summer feel much, much harder than those runs in cooler weather. On paper, you would say, well, I ran at this pace and I ran this distance. And sure, maybe you're tracking things like heart rate, but you might say to yourself, meh, not that big of a deal. It's probably working a bit harder than I needed to be, but it's fine. You might in your mind still chalk, let's say it's supposed to be an easy run. In your mind, you might still say, well, you know what? That was supposed to be an easy run. You know what? Close enough. It wasn't actually easy, but it was supposed to be, and whatever. That's like my normal easy pace. I'm sure it's fine. But the actual stress you experienced was not that of an easy run. The stress you experienced was that of a moderate intensity run. And so over time, accumulating moderate runs when they should be easy runs means you're going to end up with a lot more training load than you probably prepared for. And that's why one of the big reasons that I preach how important easy effort, truly easy effort, actually slowing down to spend time in your easy effort zone is, because accumulating large amounts of moderate volume is significantly more stressful on your body than accumulating large amounts of easy volume, like by exponential factors. But we're going to talk about all that as we get into it. Thinking about the concept of how we look at training load, you might say, well, how much stress I'm under right now, or like today or this week, like what does that mean? So training load, we can look at training load in an acute training load and chronic training load. So acute, right, in this context typically means the most previous week or 7 days of training. Now, 5 days to 10 days, but it's the most recently, what have you done? How much have you worked? And so this is considered recent training stress. In some ways, this is also considered your fatigue score, or not your fatigue score, but this is be a consideration of like how much fatigue you are experiencing relative to your chronic training load, or that long-term training load. So the chronic training load, the time frame there we're typically looking at in how we relate these two to each other. It's typically the last 4 to 6 weeks of training that you're doing is your chronic training load, and then your acute training load is the most recent 7 days. So you are comparing most recent week to generally what you've done in the last 4 to 6 weeks. And so what we want to see, what we are hoping to see, is that not only over time are you going to be able to increase both of those things, right? So I'll be able to handle more from a base fitness, from my chronic, my long-term training load, but I'll also be able to handle more acute, right? Handle more fatigue while also still being able to stay in balance and recovery. And like I said, looking at the relation of those things to each other, this is the acute to chronic workload ratio. We are looking at, well, what's the acute versus the chronic number, essentially. And this is your fatigue level versus your fitness level. And when you have a very, very high ratio of acute to chronic, a very high ratio of fatigue to fitness, you are at risk. You are flirting with danger, my friends. You are approaching, I'll say you're on the on-ramp to the danger zone. You haven't gotten to the highway yet, but you are actually, depending on how hard you're working, you might be in the express lane. So we're going to look at the ratio, because the ratio is what tells you what's happening. Acute training load on its own isn't really helpful. A chronic training load actually would be, what we're looking for, the ratio of your acute to your chronic fatigue, or of your training load. So when the value is too high, we are in danger zone. So the sweet spot, that ratio, the recommendation is to typically keep it between 0.8 and 1.2 or 1.3. And if you are getting above that, especially above 1.5, that's a huge red flag. That means you are probably doing way more than your body can handle. And if you are going to do that, then you need to probably put some serious time into recovery rather than just continuing with your training as you had planned to do. So this is looking at the ratio between your acute training load and your chronic training load. So we want to keep that ratio in the sweet spot. Too low, lower than that, 0.8, we start to think about, well, I'm not really doing enough to maintain my fitness. And of course, if you're doing something, right, if you're hanging around that 0.8 ratio, you're probably going to be fine forever. I've done episodes on how fast does it take for you to actually lose fitness? And the answer to that is it happens more slowly than you would think, and you are able to maintain much more fitness than you would realize if you just simply do something regularly. But over time, yes, if you eventually are not doing enough, if your acute training load is continually less than, right, and continues to drop below that ratio, that 0.8 kind of lower end, over time, you are going to notice that you're going to start losing some fitness. You will see some detraining happen. But most of the time, we're not talking about that. We're usually talking about doing way too much. And that's what we want to avoid. You may have heard, I hope you've heard things about don't do too much too soon. Don't increase your volume too soon. Be careful with increases in volume and intensity at the same time. Maybe you've heard about things like the quote unquote 10% rule. This is something that, I would say it's a rule. This is where you're not supposed to increase your weekly volume more than 10% week over week. Decent advice doesn't always paint the full picture, because too much too soon is entirely relative. And even when we do too much, whether it's too much in general or too much too soon, it doesn't always result in a problem. And I know all of us have done something which objectively was probably going to get us injured, or just was really dumb, or just was way too much. And it seemed like it turned out okay. So the next time we do it, we're not worried about the consequences, because we figured, I was fine last time I did it. I'm sure I'll be fine this time. And then in classic runner fashion, what do? We tend to do it harder. We tend to go harder, and then something bad can happen. So too much too soon, we're trying to avoid this. That 10% rule guideline is helpful, but oftentimes when runners implement this, we think about volume, too much increases in the context of mileage or kilometers, that distance. So oftentimes you'll see runners talking about, I don't want to increase more than 10% week over week. I'm running 30 miles this week. I'm running 33 miles next week, 10%. But training load and what that actually signifies It could be totally different from what you're actually running in terms of mileage. Higher intensity running is significantly more stressful on your body than lower intensity running, period. Like by exponential factors. We had a guest on, I forget who it was. I think it was Dr. Phil Batterson talking last year about, maybe 2 years ago, about muscle fatigue. One of the really interesting things that he said was that essentially, once you get above your aerobic threshold, once you start working harder outside of your easy effort zone, you're not just working a little bit harder. Your training load, your training stress, how hard you have to work, how intense that is on your body, it's rising exponentially. It's not just a little bit harder, it is significantly harder. So when we talk about increasing week over week or just maintaining, making sure you're not doing too much too soon, most runners are only going to look at volume. You're going to look at your schedule and say, oh no, I'm running through 30 miles this week and 34 miles and then 36 miles and then I have a down week. So, in the context of those 3 weeks, that volume increase is totally fine. And I agree that volume, that over 3 weeks of running, that sounds completely fine for most people. But what's left on the table in this conversation is, well, how much intensity do you have in your week? How much of that is easy versus hard, and how much have you been doing up until this point? Are you increasing your volume and also increasing intensity? Are you increasing your volume and also one of those days is going from an easy run and now it's a workout instead? You're not just running 10% more volume, you're running more than 10% more training load, training stress if you're doing that. So the reason I bring this up is not for everybody to whip out their calculators and start saying like, well, how much should I actually increase this week? It's to help you understand that, understanding how your training impacts you from what it takes out of you and how to put some back in and how to progress over time, is that it is more than just the mileage. It's more than just the pace. It is a complex array of factors that mean that it's really important for you to listen to your body and just make sure that you're making really good decisions. It can help you prevent overtraining, I'll just put it that way. So yeah, managing volume increases, making sure you're not doing too much too soon. You may have found yourself in a situation where you thought you were following all the quote unquote correct rules with regards to training increases, and you still ended up with problems, injury, burnout. Now, assuming everything else went well, assuming that you were actually running your easy runs easy, that you were eating enough for your training, that you were getting enough sleep, that your goal is appropriate for your fitness, yada, 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 it is entirely possible to still end up overdoing it simply because we're not understanding how increases in both volume and intensity impact our training load. A lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. So, all right, where do we go from here? Looking at my little outline to keep myself on track. So, we're really looking at keeping our training load within our general capacity for handling that load. It's not to say that you can't work hard, because you should and you need to. You do need to stress yourself. You should be doing things that challenge you. You're going to be fatigued at times. But what we're looking to do is never do so much more that you can handle that you are exceeding your load. Sorry, that your load exceeds your capacity. One of my guests earlier this season, Alyssa Ford, we were talking about injury management, injury prevention. And one of the things that she talked about was, imagine that you're pouring coffee into a coffee cup. And if the coffee cup is very small, then that coffee is going to spill over. Let's say you're trying to pour a regular sized cup of coffee into an espresso cup. You're going to get 2 ounces in there before it spills over. The cup's not big enough. You have exceeded your capacity. Except when you do this with coffee, it doesn't get a stress fracture. So that's what we're really trying to avoid here. Keeping your load and capacity in general balance. Signs of imbalance, obviously, outside of even looking at training load ratios and all the numbers and stuff, it's also paying attention to how you feel. Are you unusually sore? Are you experiencing fatigue that never really goes away? Is your performance declining? Are you having these injuries that just never seem to go away? It's worth looking at your training load But I would also revisit all the other things. Like if we're stuck in that, it's worth a full overhaul of not just, well, what's my training load? Excuse me. Oh my gosh. Yeah. What's my training load? But am I actually doing all the things I need to be doing beyond just managing numbers? And also, it's going to help you feel more confident over time if you know that you can handle what you're asking your body to do without wondering, is this a workout that's going to get me injured? Is this the training cycle where I might finally stay healthy the whole time? Nobody wants that. So how do you actually quantify this? How do you measure this? So this whole field, this whole concept originated in the 1970s with something called TRIMP, training impulse, TRIMP, training impulse. It was developed, like I said, in the 70s by Dr. Eric Bannister, and it is an expression of how hard you worked for how long you did, represented by a number. And how hard you worked in this measurement is measured with heart rate. Your heart rate is a really great proxy for understanding how hard your body is working. Now, of course, if you are going to use heart rate in your training in any capacity, if you're going to rely on any sort of metrics that use heart rate in them, you have to make sure your heart rate is being accurately measured. Your optical sensor on your watch, don't care what watch it is going to be the least accurate measurement device that you have, despite being the most convenient and built into pretty much every watch you could buy now that isn't an analog watch. But your optical sensor on your wrist is far more prone to things like cadence lock or cadence confusion, or just simply not recording accurate data. So if you are going to use heart rate in your training, and I've talked about this extensively before, it is strongly advised that you get some sort of heart rate measurement device. So whether it is a chest strap, or I personally like and use the Coros heart rate armband. So this is an optical sensor as well, but you can, so you wear it on your upper arm and you position it so the sensor is between, so it's kind of like on the outside of your upper arm, in between two muscles, like your deltoid and your tricep. Don't at me, I'm not a PT. But anyways, on the outside of your arm, and it stays there and it measures your heart rate. And so the really cool thing about optical sensors that aren't on your wrist is that they're very accurate. And the armband is shown to be pretty much just as accurate as a chest strap, both of which are significantly more accurate than a watch. So I would strongly recommend getting a heart rate strap, whether that is the armband from Coros or another strap, because it's going to make your understanding of, well, am I even looking at accurate information? It's going to take that guesswork out of the equation. You know that at least you're giving it accurate information to play with. Because we have to make sure that we're actually using real numbers to actually make decisions off real information. So with TRIMP, training impulse, it looks at your heart rate, how hard you worked by using your heart rate data, and then how long you worked for. So an hour, and your heart rate is whatever it is, it's going to spit out a score. Pretty simple. Now, obviously you might think to yourself, okay, like, does it measure it every minute? Like, is it average heart rate for the whole session? Depends on what you're using to measure it. So if you're using a device like your Coros Pace 3 or a similar watch, and it is giving you a training load score or some sort of metric attached to your training data, it is likely taking a crap ton of measurements, probably more than once a minute, and developing your training stress metrics based off of that. If you were doing the quick and dirty way, which I kind of did, and I'll tell you my story about my spreadsheet. So when I first started seriously tracking training data, let me tell you why I started doing it. So I used to have this gigantic spreadsheet that I used to track some other things in my training. So this is outside of, training app. This was, like I said, a spreadsheet. And what I would do, because I was really, I don't want to say frustrated or concerned, but it was really important to me to know that even though my paces might fluctuate significantly throughout the year, because at the time I was living in the South. Well, I guess I technically live in the South now still, but I was living in Florida. And you are going to experience such it's so hot and so humid in the summer that I really just needed a reassurance that I could look at large sets of my own information over time and make sure that I was trending in the right direction. So what I was looking at was not obviously I was just like, yeah, distance, but I was tracking things like heart rate. I was also tracking my own quick and dirty little, now I know, TRIMP score, training stress score. And what I would do is I would take the duration of the thing that I did. So even though typically train, I do now train more by time, but the time I was training 100% by distance. But I would put the duration in. So let's say I ran for whatever, 60 minutes. So I'd put the minutes in one column, and then I would put my RPE score in another column. So 1 to 10 RPE. So 1 essentially being basically a walk, 10 being I basically puked and threw up, somewhere in between there. And I would assign an RPE score, and then that would calculate and give me my training stress score, and then I would track it over time. So it allowed me to see essentially how much training can I handle, how hard am I working, but it also allowed me to quantify session efforts across conditions. So that's what I was doing before I learned that actually you can buy things that will do this for you in a much more sophisticated way. The way that your training load scores are calculated by devices are a lot more sophisticated than minutes times RPE or minutes times average heart rate. Like I said, it's taking multiple readings, many readings throughout your entire workout or your run, and then coming up with a score based on that. You might say to yourself, okay, well, I guess I can do that at home as well. I mean, but how do I figure out like how to do maybe I have an easy run warm up, and then I have like a workout, and then I have a recovery run. So like, do I take average heart rate? How do I quantify that? So in the context of general training intensity distribution, I know, God, this episode has the worst phrases in it. This is like listening to a conference on insurance. This is no offense to the insurance people out there. This is like, oh my God. Training intensity distribution, your TID, your TID, if you will. Training intensity distribution is an expression of where your training intensity is distributed throughout your training week. You've almost certainly heard of the 80-20 rule, 80-20 running. 80% easy, 20% hard. 80-20, 80-20. Again, not a rule, not even a guideline, just like kind of a generally good idea. Because you're going to have parts of your periods of your training where you're doing, first of all, oh my God, total side rant. Okay, so 80-20, sorry, 80-20 running is a little bit misunderstood. 80-20 does not mean that you don't ever run moderate. 80-20, in its purest expression, it's really about 80% easy and 20% not easy, including moderate and hard. The reason that we talk about gray zone running and why it's a problem to be in zone 3 when you're supposed to be in zone 2, blah, blah, it's that, again, talking about that overaccumulation of training stress. If you're running in a moderate intensity zone and you're supposed to be there on that day, then you are doing exactly what is intended. You're nailing that. Awesome. Rock on. That's great. But if you're in your moderate intensity zone and you're supposed to be in your easy zone, that's where the problem is. So that's why we talk about this. It's so important. Keep your easy runs easy. Easy runs easy. Easy runs easy. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with problems. But broadly speaking, training intensity distribution is an understanding of how much intensity you are doing in your week in which zone. So you have your easy, you have your moderate, and you have your hard. Seriously, training intensity zones are actually that simple. You can make them as complicated as you want, but you have easy, moderate, and hard. 1, 2, 3. Easy is easy, below your aerobic threshold. Moderate is between aerobic threshold and your lactate threshold, about your 1 hour race pace. And then above that is all the other stuff, so that's hard. We talk about training intensity distribution in this broad, whether it's an 80-20 or a pyramidal 75-5-20, whatever. We are typically referring to the general intensity of the session. One of the most common questions that I get about 80-20 when it comes to 80-20 running or 80% easy, 20% is, well, how do I account for my workouts with a warm up and a cool down? And if I have recovery intervals, Like, how do I figure out how many miles of that workout should go in the easy column and how many miles of that workout should go in the, that's not how you figure out your session intensity distribution for that session. That session's a hard session or a moderate session. Like whatever the purpose of that session is, that's kind of the big label of that session. I'm just stamped it. That's what that, if you're watching this, I'm stamping it. If you have an easy run, but it has strides, that's an easy run. If you have a half marathon pace tempo workout, but you have a warm up as part of it, that whole thing is still a moderate workout. If you have 5K pace repeats on the track with a warm up and a cool down, that whole workout is considered a hard workout from a session intensity standpoint. Training load management and going in a bit more granular allows us to be more specific in telling us how hard we actually worked in that session. Because you might think to yourself, okay, but I mean, I get that from a general planning standpoint, but what if I'm working harder in one of my track workouts and less hard in another, and maybe one day it's hotter, but how do I account for the easy stuff? So training, the training stress scores or management or the metrics, whatever, will take into account, generally speaking, how hard it was. It still doesn't tell you, like, I guess it could technically, no, not in that metric, actually. So maybe it would tell you your training intensity distribution, but not in a training stress score or a TRIMP or a training load score. Sorry, I digress. The way that I handled this in my big dumb spreadsheet was that I would kind of kick down my RPE for workouts a little bit. So let's say that let's say I was doing a half marathon tempo workout, and the workout part of that workout, maybe that felt like in 7.5, but combined with my warm up, maybe I had a cool down, I would have kicked that RPE down to like a 6 or a 6.5. Like I was still working. It was definitely not easy, but the entire thing wasn't a 7. So that's how I would account for that. But you don't have to do that. Like I said, you can just have your device do it for you. So TRIMP, training impulse. So that is your duration times how hard you worked, and and then it's just a score, and you get it, and you get one every single day that you do something. So you can if you really wanted to get into this, there are ways to actually use TRIMP or training load or this type of training load management, these numbers, as actual metrics and targets. So maybe in base building, you're not really worried about duration or distance. You're simply looking to do more work. You could set TRIMP targets for your week or training load targets. I'm only saying that because I know somebody's going to ask me. I have never in my life met anybody who trains this way. Not runners, at least. I'm guarantee you there are probably a lot more multidisciplinary or cyclist sports that are more conducive to that kind of thing. I've never met anybody who trains with like training load targets, but you technically could. And some of you who might be runners and other athletes might have experienced doing that in your other sport. When it comes to what TRIMP does, like TRIMP is basically still how most devices calculate your training stress. It's kind of hard to mess with a classic. Like I came up, like I arrived at it independently on my own. You guys watch Mad Men? I came up with it independently on my own at the same time. Pretty self-explanatory. How hard am I working and how long am I working that hard for will help you understand, well, how much was it? What did it cost you? And so TRIMP is the underpinning for most devices that use training load in some capacity. So whether that is they are using their own semi-proprietary algorithm, like at its core, it is still how hard did you work and how long did you do it for? And then it spits out some numbers. There are other very similar ways like TRIMP, different versions of TRIMP. Like I said, training stress score, TSS. This is something that you may have found if you are somebody who uses power, especially, again, going back to being a multidiscipline sport person. If you are used to riding with a power meter or even running with a power meter, you may have been more familiar with training stress scores. Same thing, essentially, it's duration and another thing that helps indicate how hard you are working. So maybe that is power, or that is, I don't love pace, honestly, because it really truly is a 100% external metric, but you could use it if you really wanted to. But pretty much heart rate and power are the big ones you're going to find. And again, there are going to be places that have kind of massaging the numbers, and they have some proprietary things. And I'm not at all purporting to be an expert on like how these scores are calculated by these individual proprietary companies. But I am telling you, this is what they're doing. Essentially, this is how they're arriving at that score. I don't know like what specific things they're doing, but broadly speaking, they are serving you up how hard did you work? And they did that by looking at how long you did it for and how hard you were working, using some sort of metric that tracks that intensity internally. So, like I said, we're going to talk briefly about how to understand how you're responding to your training load, not just from well, how much training am I doing? And is my acute to chronic workload ratio in check? But beyond that, how am I responding to it? And that's why I really like to look at heart rate variability. This is also going to be its own standalone episode at some point because heart rate variability is pretty cool. I have been tracking my heart rate variability in some form or another since, oh my God, 2018. So it's been like, 7 years. And the really cool thing now is that it's so much easier to take a heart rate variability measurement than it used to be. You still can do it the way that I used to, and I still can if I have the Weltory app on my phone still. You can still take it, if you have an app on your phone, you can take it with your phone camera and your pulse on your finger. Most, like I said, some smart devices will have and measure your HRV. My 8 Sleep mattress topper, like the cooling in here. Oh my God. First of all, that's like the best thing I've ever bought in my entire life. That measures my heart rate variability when I sleep. So there are many, many, many places, many wearables, many devices that you have that might just give you your heart rate variability without even you having to go look it up. But your heart rate variability, broadly speaking, is the variation in the time between your heartbeats. Even when your heartbeat is exceedingly regular and steady, there are still millisecond, nanosecond differences between the heartbeats that you have. And that variation, that variability, can tell us something about what's going on inside, as it were, under the hood. So a higher heart rate variability, when you have more variability between your heart rates, between your heartbeats, typically indicates that you are in a more parasympathetic system dominant state. So your parasympathetic nervous system is part of your nervous system, and it is what is colloquially called the rest and digest system. So if you are in a more parasympathetic dominant state, you are more relaxed, rest, digest. Your body is experiencing low stress. It's working on repairing some stuff. You're just chilling. Things are good. On the other end of the spectrum, if your heart rate variability is low, that indicates that you are in more of a sympathetic dominant state. Your sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic, and sympathetic nervous system are two sides, kind of the same coin, if you will. And your sympathetic nervous system is the one that is activated or more online when you are in that fight or flight mode. It's not a bad thing to be in fight or flight mode when you are doing something that needs you to be in that mode, like when you're fighting or you're flighting. But and there are times where you need to be there, and it's where we do a lot of our workouts. It's where we do a lot of our exercises. It's how, you can run in a rest and digest state, but at the same time, it helps to be in your sympathetic dominant state sometimes, but not when you're not supposed to be. And so that's when heart rate variability can really help us understand, where am I? What is my system responding to? I will say my experience being a woman in her late 30s, that I have spent pretty much my whole life trying to figure out how to actually be friends with my body and my brain instead of telling them to shut the F up, like ignoring every single sign and signal that it gave me. I spent most of my teenage years and some of my 20s just like ignoring that I was hungry all the time. Just these things that were not in tune with how we feel. And it's not, it's not great. It's not your fault. It's not great though. So anything that we can do to help us understand more in a more detailed way how we can feel with the help of some metrics like heart rate variability, I think it's really great. That's one of the reasons I really like to use heart rate as a tool with easy runs, not because I want you to have to use heart rate for every run for the rest of your life, but because I want you to understand what that zone is supposed to feel like. Because you've probably never spent time there. Most runners haven't, not in a real way, not in a dedicated, intentional, like this is the goal of my run today way. And so when you actually feel, oh my God, is that what it's supposed to feel like? Oh, wow, I had no idea. You are able to connect that, and you over time become so in tune with what it feels like that you don't even have to look at your watch anymore. Now, you might still choose to, and I know I still do on my run, but it significantly helps color your understanding of, well, how do you feel? What's going on? That's why I really do like using heart rate variability, not because it tells you how you're supposed to feel, but it can provide some insight into how you might be feeling and then provide some guidance about decisions you should or should not be making. So thinking back, like I said, heart rate variability, the difference or the variation in the time between your heartbeats. Having a higher heart rate variability indicates more of a rest and digest state. A lower heart rate variability indicates more of a fight or flight state. And you are going to have your own personal heart rate variability range. And it's going to be different from somebody else's. And so when we are using things like heart rate variability, it's really important that you just accumulate some data first before you start to make decisions with it. So if you're going to start using heart rate or looking at heart rate variability or tracking it, I mean, it might actually, you might have weeks worth of months, years worth of heart rate variability data in your apps right now, because it might have just been tracking it for you. But if you don't, I would recommend that you gather at least several weeks of heart rate variability measurements before you then start to do things with that information or start to think about how that might impact your decision making. My heart rate variability range is low. It just is. My high is not very high. Like I said, I've been doing this for years, right? I've been measuring my heart rate variability for 7 years on and off, but mostly on. And my heart rate variability range is in a place where other people have looked at my heart rate variability and said, oh my God, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, actually, that's pretty good for me. So if somebody were to look at my heart rate variability range and use it for their like it would not be helpful. So just like with heart rate, everybody's different. You have to understand what your general range is. And a couple weeks, honestly, like that's the tip of the iceberg. Ideally, the more is better, right? We want to see how you're experiencing training stress across months and years, not just a couple weeks. What can you then do with this information? So heart rate variability is actually correlates pretty well with your training status, essentially your training readiness, how receptive you are to training, how ready you are to do the work. So looking at significant, like drastic changes in your heart rate variability, trends in your heart rate variability. If you wake up, so first of all, a really good time to take your heart rate variability readings is at the same times every day. And one of the times is recommended is essentially right when you wake up. So it used to be when I used to do this, it would be recommended like, yeah, you could use your phone, but a heart rate strap is technically best. So like wake up, stupid heart rate strap on, connect to my phone, measure it. Now I can just do it with my Coros watch. It's pretty awesome. They have this feature called the wellness check. So it's not the dial, it's the button. So if you press and hold the button on your watch, this little carousel of icons will pop up. And one of them is here, I'm just scrolling through. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Where is it? Wellness check. One's called wellness check. And this is what I do first thing in the morning when I wake up. Try not to like move too much so the dogs don't wake up and like threaten to pee before I let them outside. And you just take a wellness check. And you're not supposed to be recording a podcast while you're doing it. um, because you're supposed to like not talk and not move, but it'll measure your heart rate variability, and just having that kind of information over time. Let's say that I woke up this morning and I took my heart rate variability reading and it was high. So I knew that I was ready for a big workout, but I felt terrible. I didn't actually felt pretty okay this morning. But let's say I woke up and I felt awful. My heart rate variability was high and I had a big workout on the calendar. What did I do? Well, my heart rate variability said I should be okay. Sometimes, you just feel kind of like garbage in the morning. So what I did was I got up, kind of said, you know what, I'm going to give myself an out. If it really isn't going well, I'll bail. And went pretty well. All right, my wellness check is over. Okay, my heart rate variability is 83. My heart rate is 83. My heart rate variability is 72. Oh, guys, it's so good for me. Oh my God. It says I'm under medium amounts of stress. No, I think it's a little more stressful than you might realize. Breath per minute. So yeah, so it also gives me a respiratory rate and my oxygenation score. So yeah, heart rate variability right there. Boom. And it just syncs and I have that information. So what if you woke up and you felt fine, but your heart rate variability was very low, like very low, and you have a big workout on the schedule? Again, these are the types of things. There is no black and white. There is no cut and dried. This is one of the most frustrating things about being a runner, is that there are a lot of guidelines, but there's a lot of times when you just have to, you know what, make the best decision with the information that you have available and adjust if you need to. So in that situation, let's say that you wake up, you feel okay, your heart rate variability is low, like very low, and you have a big workout. If this were me, if I just felt okay and my heart rate variability was low and I had a really big workout, honestly, I probably wouldn't do it. I would probably push it to the following day. The concern with that situation would be, I think there would be two big concerns that I would have for myself, and maybe you're different, but this is for me. Three concerns, right? One, I'd be concerned that I would feel pressure, totally 100% self-imposed pressure, that I would feel pressure to do the whole workout once I had started it. And I know that we talk about it's okay to bail, it's okay to cut things short. Every single coach on my team will tell every single one of our athletes, hey, you know what? If you need to bail, if you need to cut this short, if things aren't going well, it's okay to stop and call it a day. But almost nobody does that. So the concern would be that I would do the whole thing, even if it probably wasn't in my best interest. Now maybe I warmed up and maybe I would feel amazing, right? Totally possible that could happen. But maybe I warm up and I don't feel great, but I've already started. So I figure, you know what? I'll just finish. And it goes fine, but I worked harder than I needed to. And I just feel really bad. Not where you want to be. Big training stress. That's a cool thing where you could go back and say, all right, I made this decision. How did that impact my training stress? How hard did I actually have to work? And then you can use that information to make better decisions. Maybe the same decision. Maybe you made the right decision. I don't know. Better decisions next time. The other concern that I might have would be that I would be really frustrated if I couldn't execute the workout the way that I wanted to. Again, I know it's okay if it feels hard. Effort's more important than pace. The most important thing is that we're working on our mindset in some of these workouts. And it's like, look, again, I say these things all the time too. And I know you've probably heard them. But when a workout's not going the way you want it to, even a run, much less a workout, when it's not going the way you want it to, and there's something riding on it, you were supposed to run these paces, run these reps, run these intervals, run this route, run these hills, whatever. And it's really easy to kind of get stuck in a spiral. So that would be a concern. Like I wouldn't need that, right? That would not be helpful for me to go out, feel shitty, excuse me, about myself, and then like what's that gonna do for me? So I'd be concerned that I'd do too much, even if it wasn't a good idea. I'd be concerned that if I wasn't able to execute the way that I wanted to, which would probably be less likely given how I would be feeling, that would be really frustrating, and I, would not be good. And the third thing would be that the third concern would be that I would just go out and essentially not be able to finish the workout. That would be a problem. It's one thing to choose to bail on a workout that isn't going well and kind of like, leave something left in the tank. It's another thing to be forced to finish a workout early because you literally could not keep going. It's definitely the worst one. But some situations where understanding your heart rate variability in the context of what you have on the day might be helpful. Again, this is not something that's supposed to tell you how you feel. It's supposed to help you make an informed decision about what to do. So again, you need to have kind of enough of this information. I'd recommend if you are going to be taking these measurements, same time every day. First thing in the morning is a great time to take one. It is super individualized, so you have to understand what your general range is. You're also going to have fluctuations. Like fluctuations are normal. We're not looking for it to be the same. You're going to have your heart rate variability in the toilet, and it's just going to be that way sometimes, especially if you're working really hard in your training cycle. You're going to have days where, yeah, you're not doing so great. Again, we are looking for overall trends. What are we doing most of the time? We want to get it mostly right most of the time. That's how we move the needle. So you might also have a device. You don't necessarily have to take that check. You might have a device, like I said, that measures your heart rate variability overnight, like my mattress pad does, or like my Coros also does. So having that information, you might, like I said, already have a bunch of that information available to you, and you can start using it. So beyond heart rate variability and thinking about the context of training stress and training load, we are not machines, and this is not about you throwing away how you feel in service of the numbers. What did I just talk about? How important it is for us to use the tools available to us to do things like understand how things are supposed to feel. We can use the numbers to help us provide insight into the subjective components of what this is all about. So you can also look at things like, in general, tracking your sleep. You can look at things like your resting heart rate. You can track things or keep note of things like your mood, or are you experiencing muscle soreness? Generally speaking, how fatigued you are. Your sleep quality can be a sign of what's going on under the hood. So these are also really important things to keep in mind, not just, well, how hard am I working and what's my heart rate variability? It's about more than that. And again, I know it's frustrating because you just want answers. Just tell me what to do. Please, just somebody tell me what the right answer is. But I'll tell you this, even when you're working with the coach one-on-one, maybe you're one of our athletes, maybe you're curious about becoming one of our one-on-one athletes. Your coach isn't like in bed with you in the morning when you're taking, I don't know, maybe you're dating. I don't know. They're not there telling you what to do. You can't text your coach at 5 a.m. when you wake up to do your workout and your heart rate variability is bad. You can't be like, what should I do? Instead, you have to make that decision on your own. Elites have to too. Really being in touch with yourself is going to be an invaluable tool and a skill for you to develop as a runner and as a person. These are all skills that we are hoping to translate into the rest of our lives. All right, training stress, training load management, the tools that you might see. All right, what else might we want to talk about today? I know that I don't want to keep you guys here too long, but I want to make sure that I'm recovering all the things I want to talk about. So let me see, we talked about scores. Okay, so one of the other things too about thinking about being recovered is that over time, if you are tracking things like your heart rate variability or your training stress, your training load, we are looking for fluctuations, but we're looking for intentional fluctuations and trends that go the way we want them to. So when you do a big workout or you run a big race, Big race isn't a great example because you get a ton of recovery after a race. Let's say you run a tune-up race. You leave it all out on the course. You ran a PR in that tune-up race. Oh my God. And you crossed the finish line and thought, hand to God, I've never worked harder in my entire life. Holy crap. We would expect that to be a significant, maybe, depending on your overall fitness. I don't know. Maybe you're an absolute monster. Maybe you run 150 miles per week, no problem. And this race was absolutely nothing to you. But we would expect that your training load would increase significantly. Your acute training load would increase significantly. That your heart rate variability would decrease, but that over time, we would see your heart rate variability increase and all your other metrics come back in line. And then we would see your chronic training load kind of adjust and increase to be like, oh, you did more and you're still doing really well. Awesome. So you're going to see things where your body's, your metrics will indicate that you're pretty beat up, but you have to stress yourself to improve, but just enough. So what I actually really like about thinking about recovery is that thinking about recovery is a dynamic process and like how recovered am I? It's not, I just say this is, again, I think this is semantics, but these types of reframing things really do help me. So it's not finishing a big workout. It's not about being mad that I'm not 100% recovered right away. It's about, all right, I know that I'm not going to be 100% recovered for a couple days. What can I do to really improve my recovery and pay attention to feeling better over time so that by the next big day in my schedule, I'm ready for it. So having a recovery status, actually it's really like Coros. Coros has never made me feel bad about myself. It's never told me that I'm losing fitness, and it's never told me that I'm detraining. But it does give me a recovery score. So it'll tell me, am I exhausted? Am I fatigued? Am I normal? Or am I fresh? Which I really like. I like that language a lot better. So yeah, so thinking about this and where do we go from here and how to use training load, it is a way to really, for runners who say how metric driven that they are, I would wonder how many of you are actually using training load and training load management and those types of tools. This is a far more refined process, I think, than simply tracking things like volume and pace and all that stuff over time, which is also interesting. That tells you, I'm going to say that's an output, right? That tells you what you could do, but the training load tells you essentially what's the way, that's not a really good analogy. What's the way I want to describe this? Your training, it's a capacity. It's like, how much can I handle? What can I do? And if you can handle more over time, how cool is that? So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get you to be able to handle more over time in a way that keeps things in balance while in balance. My God, the way I speak, I know it sounds imbalance. In balance. We're trying to keep things in balance so you get the maximum results with the minimum downtime, feeling as awesome as possible the whole time. Putting it all together, first of all, you got to actually keep track of this stuff. Seriously. Having some sort of understanding about what you're measuring and what it tells you is really important. It is incredibly easy to get lost in now data overload. Just because you can measure something does not necessarily mean that it's important at all. So thinking about, well, what am I measuring? And what am I hoping what is this going to help me understand? So if you're tracking a bunch of metrics that you've no idea what they actually mean, that's why bother? But tracking things like understanding your training load, you don't necessarily, again, it's not something you have to look at every day. We are looking for trends. We are looking for general ratio balance. We are looking for heart rate, how am I feeling in the context of what I'm doing in my training? And then all the other things. So the really cool thing about this, especially if you're a runner who, like I said, is in that all in burnout cycle, or maybe you keep getting injured, looking at your training load history. God, I keep doing it. I keep knocking the Coros box off the table. Looking at your training load history. looking at your training load history. I peeked under the hood of the training load management, training load data of some athletes, and it's really interesting stuff because if you know what you're looking for, the numbers will tell you the story. Then it will tell you what happened. And the key is that, well, how do we prevent that from happening again? So, big red flags, like I said, if you're looking at training load, you want to make sure that your acute training load, your most recent training load, is not significantly a higher ratio than your chronic training load. We want to avoid that. That's a big problem. And if you find, this is a really cool thing, if you find yourself heading into, my training load's really high and my heart rate variability is low and like it's not necessarily getting better, you can do something with that. You could put an extra rest day in there. You can cut a run short. Like you can give yourself extra recovery. That's the thing with all of this. With the training load management, if you're going to manage your training load like this, the most powerful variable you have at your disposal is how much recovery you are going to include. So just looking at it and seeing it accumulate is not necessarily helpful if you're not ever going to take action on that. So if you're watching your acute rate, if you doubled your volume last week to this week to last week, you've objectively done way too much work, right? Now you know that, you can make a better decision next time. Also, if you're the kind of person who, like I said, tends to not recognize that you're heading into overtraining territory until you're already there, looking at some of those kind of prodromal signs that, well, what happened in my training load last time this happened in the run up to this thing, and then catching it early, adding some extra recovery, and not having to go through that process again. What we're looking for is the individual zone in which we as individuals can thrive. That's what we're looking for. You are looking for what is the best thing that I can be doing? What is my sweet spot of improvement? Again, we're not always concerned with doing not enough. Most of the time, we are using this tool to make sure we're not doing too much. The risk with not doing enough is plateau. Maybe you eventually over time start to lose some fitness. The risk of doing too much is really serious. It is broken bones. It is hormonal issues. It is problems. Now, not everybody gets to that point, but that's the end of that road. The end of the other road is just you're not very fit anymore. So understanding how to keep yourself in that sweet spot of training load for improvement is super key because everybody's had to take time off from injury. It sucks, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. The other thing I really like about this is really important is that when you introduce something new, it can feel like it's actually not working. And that's because you're fatigued from it. So if you start a new training cycle or you're doing a big long run, your fitness, quote unquote fitness, will look like it dips because of that that bump in fatigue. But then when you recover, that's how your fitness improves. We talk about adaptation syndrome, general adaptation syndrome, and like how you adapt to training. So the way, again, this works, you do something really hard, your fatigue level rises, which looks like your fitness is actually lower, and then you recover and your fitness actually does improve over time. But what happens when we don't have time to recover, or we're doing so much that we can't recover, this is going to be when we are doing stacking too much week over week over week. This is why you need down weeks or cutback weeks. This is why you need plenty of easy runs. And this is why you need to understand that it's okay to make adjustments to your training schedule. You can't and shouldn't just follow it blindly. We are looking for balance over time as we improve. So now you know what training load is. Training load, training stress, training load management. Maybe now you know what those graphs and tools and numbers mean and how you can use them if you want to use them. Most important for me, I think, so there's a couple of things that I really just have in the back of my, not in the back of my mind, things that are things I check on a relatively regular basis. So not just my heart rate variability, looking at that. I don't necessarily, it's not something I go back and look at graphs of, but I look at the score that I have taken, right? So it kind of informs, all right, this is what it is right now. Cool. And then if I have questions, think, hey, I wonder, I haven't been feeling very, very good, or actually I'm feeling pretty good. I want to go back and look at my recent trends, go back and look at it that way. The other thing that I'd really like to keep an eye on is my acute training load, is my acute, that 7-day most recent. What have I done in the last 7 days? The ratio, whether or not I think I even realized it up until, recently, the last like 2 or 3 years, that I was always keeping that in mind, the short term versus the long term stuff. So understanding your acute training load, what you acutely experienced in the last 7 days, and also what you should be, like what it's supposed to be. So I know the Coros does, I'm sure other apps might as well. It'll actually give you a suggested training load range based on what you've been doing previously. So if you go way above that, it's going to be like, that was too much. It kind of tells you where you need to be. It really just helps you, again, provide insight into how to train really effectively. Oh, okay. So I think we've covered all the things I wanted to cover. Yeah, this is super exciting. Training load, stress, balance, acute training load, understanding intensity and duration and how hard you're working. And the key takeaway for all of this, kind of no matter where you are coming down on using any of this, it's that the true magic of tools like training load and these scores and these metrics is when we are able to harness the power of those metrics and that information and truly connect it with what's going on inside and how we feel. And we can align the objective and the subjective and really, really make significant improvements. That's the best feeling in the world. So, again, some of you might find this interesting, but have no interest in it whatsoever. Some of you might be already whipping out your computer and charting some of your information, and some of you might be in between. Remember, this is one tool that is available to you. I personally do find that it's a very helpful one, especially if you are a self-coached runner. But I think that any tool that we can use that will help us understand ourselves more deeply is a really effective tool for us to use, because the most important part of being a runner is being able to run. And you cannot do that if you are constantly dealing with injuries and burnout, and managing your training load over time is a really great way to keep yourself in the game. Thanks so much for listening. I am very happy to have you here this week. Just as a quick reminder, you can get that free second watch strap on Coros.com when you buy something by using code RUNEXP. That's code RUNEXP on Coros.com, COROS. And if you are interested in more podcast content behind the paywall, Patreon is now live. Patreon.com/RunningExplained. We've got monthly bonus episodes. We're going to start doing book club. We're going to start doing some current events episodes. And I would love to see all of your happy, shiny, see you all, hear you all, have another place for us to hang out. So until then, I again appreciate you being here today, and I will see you all next week.